Hello everyone, I am Candy, and this is our independent research. Comparison and contrast of the four historical places: the rocks, Egypt, Easter Island, and the Colosseum.
The four places we selected are all peculiar and mysterious. We intend to learn more about the history of Easter Island, the mystery of the pyramids in Egypt, the building of the Colosseum, and the rocks in Sydney.
These are our purposes. 1. To understand the history of the rocks. 2. To understand the history of Egypt. 3. To understand the history of Easter Island.
4. To understand the history of the Colosseum. 5. To find out the similarities and differences among the rocks, the pyramid, Easter Island, and the Colosseum.
The historic stories we tell, and especially the ones we write, becomes the records of experience lived, landscapes inhabited, and events transpired. They provide guide points along the map of human experience, handholds for understanding who we are, where we have come from, what matters to us, and why. Besides, we can also learn a lot from it, and we can avoid making the same mistakes. This is why my favorite assignment is my independent research about the Rocks. The Rocks is the historic neighborhood on the western side of the Sydney Cove. It rises deeply behind the George Street and the shore of West Circular Quay to the heights of Observatory Hill. It was originally the site of the first European colony, established in 1788 when convict-bearing ships came from England to set up the colony of New South Wales. Besides, the convict side of the town is also interesting. After the arrival of the First Fleet in 1788, Talawalada became the convict side of the town, while the governor and civil personnel lived on the more orderly eastern slope of the Tank Stream. Convict women and men appropriated land on the west. Some had leases, but most did not. They built traditional vernacular houses, first of wattle and dub, with thatched roofs, later of weatherboards or rubble stone, roofed with timber shingles. They fenced off gardens and yards, established trades and businesses, built bread ovens and forges, opened shops and pubs, and raised families. They took in lodger, the newly arrived convicts who slept in kitchens. Some emancipations also had convict servants. After November 1790, large numbers of Aboriginal people came into the town to visit and to live, and apparently continued to live there over the 19th and 20th centuries. Orderly, grid-patterned streets were impossible on the rock terrain of the rocks, and people moved about mainly on foot. So a web of footpaths led along and up the shelving ledges and from door to door. For convict women in particular, the rocks above could be a place of opportunity, where they got their start in trade, buildings, and land. The dynamic Ray Raby, who arrived as a convict in 1791, started out from a small house in the rocks, amassed a fortune from trade and shipping, built a large number of fine houses in Sydney, and raised a large family.
Hello, I'm Vicky. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of Egypt? For most people, they think of pyramids. The reason is that Egypt is a place where the pyramids originated, and pyramids were where the pharaohs, the ruler of the kingdom in ancient Egypt, were buried. No pyramids are more celebrated than the Great Pyramids of Giza, located on the plateau on the west bank of the Nile River, on the outskirts of Cairo. The oldest and largest of the three pyramids at Giza, known as the Great Pyramid, are the only surviving structures out of the famed Seven Wonders of the ancient world. It was built for Pharaoh Khufu, the second of the eight kings of the fourth dynasty. Though Khufu reigned for 23 years, relatively little is known of his reign beyond the grandeur of his pyramid. The size of the pyramid's base averaged 230 meters, and its original height was 147 meters, making it the largest pyramid in the world. 3 small pyramids built for Khufu's queens are lined up next to the Great Pyramid, and a tomb was found nearby containing the empty sarcophagus of his mother, Queen Hetepheres. Like other pyramids, Khufu's is surrounded by rows of mastabas where relatives or officials of the kings were buried to accompany and support him in the afterlife. As ancient Egyptian rulers, pharaohs were both the heads of state and the religious leader of their people. The word pharaoh means great house, a reference to the palace where the pharaoh lived. Our knowledge of the Egyptian kings is based on king lists, kept by the ancient Egyptians themselves. We also rely on the History of Egypt, written in the 3rd century BC. As a priest in the temple, the author had access to many original sources, and it divided the kings into 30 dynasties as we use today. Explorers and archaeologists have discovered these tombs and learned a great deal about ancient Egyptian society from them. Pharaohs and pyramids were amazing, but still, we have a lot to learn. Maybe one day we'll find out more as we discover more about them.
Easter Island is one of the most isolated islands on Earth. It's a territory of chill that lies far off in the Pacific Ocean. Known as one of the world's sacred sites, it's most famous for its enigmatic giant stone statues of Moai, whose oversized heads, carved centuries ago, reflect the history of the dramatic rise and fall of the most isolated Polynesian culture. The first known European visitor to Easter Island was the Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, who arrived in 1722. The Dutch named the island Easter Island to commemorate the day they arrived. In 1770, the Spanish viceroy of Peru sent an expedition to the island. The explorers spent 4 days ashore and estimated a native population of some 3,000 people. Just 4 years later, the British navigator Sir James Cook arrived to find Easter Island's population decimated by what seemed to have been a civil war, with only 600 to 700 men and fewer than 30 women remaining. A French navigator, Jean, found 2,000 people on the island when he arrived in 1786. A major slave raid from Peru in 1862, followed by epidemics of smallpox, reduced the population to only 111 people by 1877. By that time, Catholic missionaries had settled on Easter Island and begun to convert the population to Christianity, a process that was completed by the late 19th century. In 1888, Chile annexed Easter Island, leasing much of the land for sheep raising. The Chilean government appointed a civilian governor to Easter Island in 1765, and the island's residents became full Chilean citizens. The best known aspect of Rapa Nui culture is the moai, the 887 human figures carved from rock between 1250 and 1500 CE and transported throughout Easter Island. The moai were believed to be the living faces of ancestors and had all been toppled by 1868. The tallest moai erected, Kaparo, was almost 10 meters high and weighed 80.7 tons. The heaviest moai erected was a shorter but squatter moai, weighing 84.6 tons. One unfinished sculpture, if completed, would have been approximately 21 meters tall, with a weight about 145 to 165 tons. The moai rest on large stone platforms called ahu, the most famous which are Ahu Tangaraki, the largest ahu, and some moai have heads of red volcanic stone known as puako. There are still a lot of unsolved mysteries about the moai. Scientists still have no idea how the moais are moved and the purposes of the moais. Currently, the Rapa Nui and the Chilean government are focused on preserving and restoring the statues, including denoting an area that includes many of the statues, Rapa Nui National Park, as a World Heritage Site.
Hello everyone, I'm Ginger. When you think of Rome, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Mine would be the Colosseum. The Colosseum is famous for its games, dramas, reenactments, and even public executions. Today, I'm going to tell you facts and tales about the Colosseum that you never knew existed and show you why it is magnificent. Now, let's take a look at its intriguing history and the notable spectacles that were carried out within its premises. The Colosseum is also called Flavian Amphitheater. It is an oval amphitheater in the center of the city of Rome, Italy, just east from the Roman Forum. It is the largest amphitheater built during the Roman Empire. The Colosseum is still standing today, despite its age. The Colosseum offered gladiator fights, executions, and animal hunts. The people who fought in the Colosseum are called gladiators. A gladiator was an armed combatant who entertained audiences during the Roman Republic and Roman Empire in violent confrontations. On the morning of the games, spectators flooded in through 80 different entrance arches and up countless stairways to their allocated seats. Then the gladiators emerged, the star attractions that the masses of spectators had come to see. The Colosseum is built of travertine limestone, tuff, and brick-faced concrete. It could hold an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 spectators at various points of its history, having an average audience of some 65,000. Also, the seating arrangements reflect the stratification of Roman society. Senators were seated closest to the stage, while the poorest Roman citizens and women stood at the highest level. The Colosseum was built by up to 100,000 slaves, and unlike most ancient amphitheaters which were built into hillsides for support, the Colosseum is so impressive because it is a freestanding structure. Eventually, the Romans' interests in the games waned. After the fall of Western Roman Empire, the Colosseum began to deteriorate. Unfortunately, a series of earthquakes during the 5th century damaged the structure, and it also suffered from bombings during the World War II. Now, nearly 2/3 of the original building has been destroyed. Nevertheless, a restoration project in the 1990s began to repair the Colosseum. Today, it is one of modern-day Rome's most popular tourist attractions, hosting millions of visitors a year, and it is still an iconic symbol of Imperial Rome.
We read some books and searched websites about the histories of these 4 places. Besides, we try to communicate ideas with each other. Then we find out the similarities and differences among these 4 attractions. We try to figure out the best answers to our questions via group discussions. At last, we made our conclusions and finished the research. All 4 attractions were built with rocks, but for different reasons. For example, the houses in the Rocks, Sydney, were all made of rocks. The Rocks remains as one of the few places in Australia where authentic early convict evidence is accessible to the public.
The Rocks is the place of first sustained contact in the continent between Aboriginal people and European settlers. As we all know, the pyramids were tombs for royals in ancient Egypt. We are still not sure how the people lifted the huge rocks and made the pyramids. It is a mystery. The Moai is one of the most famous tourist spots. The mountain's rocks are the main material of the Moai. People still have no idea how the huge rocks were moved and why they were built. The Colosseum was made entirely with natural stones, extracted in Tivoli and carried to the center of the city across the Anine and Tiber rivers. Romans used Roman travertine for its proximity to the city, but above all for its natural qualities of resistance to loads of atmospheric agents.
Slavery was found all over the world, while the one who held the power needed more people to do things for them. Slaves were sold, tortured, and hurt. They built tombs, buildings, and did the things that people wouldn't like to do. In Australia, slaves were told to do boring things, such as pearling, sugarcane, and cattle industries. On Easter Island, the original were sold by the Westerners. When building the Colosseum, Jewish slaves were made to do the work. And as the same, the slaves in Egypt needed to work for the pharaohs to build their palace or pyramid. Differences 1. Latin and Greek are still spoken by people today. Besides, their letters look like English letters. 2. There are more than 100 kinds of the original languages in Australia. However, there are only 13 languages that are still being transmitted to children. The others are extinct.
Third, there were 3 languages that were spoken in Rapa Nui. The first language is fully extinct. The second language is Rapa Nui, which is spoken by the old Aboriginals. The third language is Spanish, which is spoken by most of the people on the island. 4. Egyptian. We do know what it sounded like and what it means, but no one really uses this language to communicate with others. The letters look more like drawings. Conclusions. According to our previous study, we came to 3 conclusions. First, ancient people built buildings with rocks. Second, people speak different languages in these 4 places. Third, historically, there are many different types of slavery, including chattel, bonded, forced labor, and sexual slavery. The key characteristics of slavery are ones generally agreed, such as the loss of freedom of movement and legal rights. In our research, we found slaves doing things such as building tombs and buildings for their masters. This is so fun to have time to discuss, read, and think about where the room of improvement is. I really had a good time.
I had a good time learning new things about these interesting places.
Although this isn't the first time that I did a research, it's a totally different experience because it's about a although this isn't the
I learned about things I never knew before, and it is very good practice to work outside my comfort zone.
These are the references.
Thank you for listening.